Oh, hello. My name is Dr. Kurt Sander, and this is Music Theory Simplified. You might be wondering why I'm playing with toy building blocks. Well, there's actually a good reason. Today we begin the study of seventh chords, and this is the first in a 3-video series on seventh chords. Students will sometimes ask me, when or why would you use a seventh chord over a triad? What advantages do you have with 4 pitches rather than 3? Well, there are actually 3 different answers to that question. The first and most common reason why we might use a seventh chord is that it adds an element of dissonance to an otherwise consonant triad. If you think about the triad, there's no way that we can configure the triad to make a dissonant interval. So it's pretty much a consonant entity. But when you add a seventh to a chord, which is basically taking a triad and adding a third above that triad, you're adding the interval of a seventh between the root and the seventh of the chord. And the seventh is a dissonant interval. It's not the fifth, it's not the third, it's dissonant. And if you've been watching these videos for a while, you'll know that dissonance in tonal music equals instability. Whenever we hear dissonance, the ear tends to want to hear consonants that follows, which is really a good way to strengthen the ends of phrases because it really pushes us toward that final one tonic chord. The second reason why you might use a seventh chord instead of a triad is that it adds another pitch, and another pitch adds depth to the harmony or color. If you've ever listened to jazz music, you know that it's full of seventh chords, and it's a very rich harmonic palette as a result. The third reason is one that you may not have thought about. Let's say we're harmonizing a given melody. Well, if we were only harmonizing it with triads, 3-note chords, that gives us only 3 possible choices for any given note. But if we include seventh chords, that gives us a whole nother chord possibility, because we know that seventh chords have 4 different pitches. So that melody note that we're harmonizing could conceivably be harmonized by one of 4 different chords. So before we get started, you might be wondering, why were you holding Legos at the beginning of this video? Well, here's where music theory becomes simplified. You see, there are 5 different kinds of seventh chords, and we're going to look at each one of those. But if we break them down to their most fundamental intervals, we can see that all seventh chords are built on major thirds and minor thirds. So if we think of these thirds as Legos, it's just a simple process of stacking these Legos to create the seventh chord we're trying to build. Let me show you what I mean. All triads have either a major third or minor third bass. We can see that this C major chord would have a major third Lego, and the C minor chord would have a minor third Lego as its bass. In order to complete these major and minor triads, we have to add another Lego on top. For the major third to make a major triad, we add a minor third Lego. And for the minor triad, we add a major third Lego. So these are our major and minor triads. But don't forget, we also have one chord that consists of 2 minor thirds, and this is the diminished triad. You know, I used to love to play with Legos when I was little. You could make so many different things, but I never thought about making chords. So just to summarize, whenever you have 2 Legos on top of each other, in this system, the simplification system that we're using, you're looking at a triad. Now those could be major, minor, or 2 minor on top of each other. But when we want to make seventh chords, we have to take those 2 and we have to add another third on top. And that third could be major or minor, and the seventh chord could be a combination of major and minor thirds. So let's talk about what these seventh chords look like and the 5 seventh chord qualities that we have in tonal music. It can be very helpful to memorize the 5 qualities of seventh chords, understanding what triad is at the base of each. We can break it down into 3 categories. The first, the major seventh and the dominant seventh chord, sometimes called the major minor, have the major triad as its base. The third quality, the minor seventh chord, is the only one that has a minor triad as its base. And the remaining two, the half diminished seventh and the fully diminished seventh, both have a diminished triad at its base. Okay, now I want to take a look at these chords one at a time, starting with the tallest in terms of intervallic height and working our way down to the smallest. So take careful note of how each of these chords is made up of major and minor thirds. Let's begin by looking at those two seventh chords that have a major triad at the base. To build the chord, we stack a minor third on top of a major third. If you recall, this is how we build a major triad. But if we add a major third on top, we've now created a major seventh chord. This chord is simply a major triad with a major third on top. But now let's replace this major third with a minor third. This is how you build a dominant seventh chord, a major triad with a minor third on top. Now let's get rid of this major triad. We're going to switch these two Legos around, and now we have the minor third below the major third, which we know is a minor triad. If you recall, we said that there's only one type of seventh chord that has a minor triad, and when we put a minor third on top of that, we get a minor seventh chord. Two minor thirds on top of each other creates a diminished triad. There are two types of seventh chords that have a diminished triad at its base. When we put a major third on top of a diminished triad, we have a chord that's called half diminished. When we replace that major third and stack three minor thirds on top of each other, this is a fully diminished chord, and it's the most compressed of all the seventh chords. Now let's summarize. There are two chords that are built on a major triad, the major seventh and the dominant seventh. There's only one chord built on a minor triad, and that's the minor seventh chord. And the remaining two, the fully diminished and the half diminished seventh, are both built on a diminished triad base. You should make a point of studying these. Okay, now it's your turn to test yourself to see how well you know these. Here's how this is going to work. Behind the curtain, you're going to find a seventh chord, and it's your job to identify it. But here's the thing, you're not going to see notes on a staff. Right now, we're going to start off by showing you Legos. And if you can memorize the patterns of Legos, when it comes time to look at notes on a staff, it's going to be a whole lot easier because you've already memorized the pattern. Make sure you have access to the spacebar, which will pause the video and give you time to answer. Okay, ready to go? This has a minor triad base with a minor third on top, and we know the only seventh chord that has a minor triad is the minor seventh. Here's the next one. This has a diminished triad, so we know it's one of two chords. If it has a major third on top, we know it's only half diminished, not fully diminished. Here's the next one. Did you identify the major triad base here and the major third on top? If so, you correctly identified it as a major seventh chord. Here's another one. This chord also has a major triad base, but it has a minor third on top, making it a dominant seventh chord. Let's try one more. I hope you identified the diminished triad here with another minor third on top. All minor thirds makes this a fully diminished seventh chord. So how did you do? Hopefully you got all the seventh chord qualities. Now let's move on to actual pitches. So we're going to go through the same process. Behind the curtain you're going to find a seventh chord, but this time it's going to be in actual pitches on a staff. Be sure to note what clef we're using for these seventh chords. Good luck! Again, make sure you have access to the pause button. Here we go. This chord has a major triad with a minor third on top, making it a dominant seventh chord. This diminished triad at the base makes it one of two possible chords, but when we add a major third on top, that makes it half diminished. Did you note the clef on this? If you did, you'd see we have a major triad with a major third on top, and that is a major seventh chord. So how did you do? If you got them all correct, great. We're ready to move on to the next lesson. But if you missed a few here and there, there's always something you can do to improve. One of the things that I recommend is to run down to your local toy store and pick yourself up some Legos. So while you're sitting eating lunch, you can practice building seventh chords. Well, that's all the time we have for today's lesson. In our next lesson, we're going to look at seventh chords as they exist in inversions. Until then, this is Dr. Kurt Sander reminding you always to keep it simple.